There's a lot that goes into scaling that a lot of people don't prepare for. And you really have to start scaling ahead of time when you're building that out. So understanding what your manufacturing capacity is, and if you hit or exceed a certain percentage, you're going to want to start scaling by buying new machinery or buying excess inventory and raw goods, making sure that you have the ability to handle increased orders, because when something starts taking off, it takes off fast.
Welcome to the Inside Forbes Councils podcast. Each episode shares transformative insights and advice from members of Forbes Councils, a group of invitation-only communities for successful executives and entrepreneurs. This is Inside Forbes Councils.
Hi everyone, this is Stephen Ganoza. Welcome to Inside Forbes Councils. Today we have my interview with Joel Goldstein, the president of Mr. Checkout Distributors. We discussed how new products find a home in retail stores, ways to evaluate those new products, how Mr. Checkout connects distributors with retail stores, and what producers need to know before their product becomes a success. So Joel, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So you are the president of Mr. Checkout Distributors. Why don't we start off by just having you tell us a little bit about what Mr. Checkout does?
Of course. So Mr. Checkout's a company that started about 30 years ago by my father, who was a distributor up in Boston. And he drove around servicing a lot of the convenience stores, truck stops, travel centers. And he was known as the guy that does everything by the checkout counter. So people started calling him, "There's Mr. Checkout." And he took the name, ran with it, and started a training program across the country to train people on how to start and to grow a route, a DSD distribution route. And so when I came on board, we really hit a crescendo, you could say, where we sold out the country as far as routes were concerned. But the problem was that a lot of the guys weren't able to make margin on a lot of the products that they were servicing. So they were doing Bic lighters and things like that. And there wasn't any money in it anymore because Costco and cash and carries really took over. So as a response to that, we really became the product management arm for right now approximately 900 distributors across the country, everything from grocery to pharmacy to beverages. And that's where we find ourselves. So we have about 13 industry associations that we own and operate, and we do product management for approximately 900 distributors across the country.
So I want to go back into the history a little bit for anybody who's, including myself, who's not terribly familiar with this industry. You mentioned that you bought out the routes. Can you explain a little bit about what that means exactly? So what services was your father providing? What does it mean to buy out the routes? What does that actually functionally look like?
Sure. So we trained the distributors. The distributors initially paid to have my father and his trainers come out, start their routes, introduce them to the stores, show them how to build a business. Very similar to a franchise model. However, it was a business opportunity and not a franchise because they didn't take the Mr. Checkout name. So we went store to store building a route for these individual distributors. And they were able to really take it and make it their own. So a lot of our guys, especially in the New York area, they became the snack jobbers and the distributors that handled all of the sundry items to the bodegas and to the smaller in-person stores. And in the South, we really became the distribution arm for a lot of the general stores and truck stops that are everywhere.
So just to clarify then, you're not the one actually distributing the products. You're not doing the trucking or anything. You're just hooking up distributors with end retail locations?
Somewhat. So we do the product management for the independent distributors. So when we're working with a distributor, we're trying to find out what opportunities he's seeing in the market, where the gaps are. And on the supplier side, we're able to bring new products into those stores. And we've been able to successfully launch products like 5-Hour Energy, Blue Electronic cigarettes, as well as many snack and beverage items as well.
So you mentioned bringing new products to market. Tell me a little bit about how that happens.
So bringing a new product to market is probably one of the most important steps when we're developing a new line. First, we have to find the distributors that see the opportunity in the product line. So we do an initial outreach to our distributor network first via email, and then we follow up with phone calls to find out who's interested, who actually sees the opportunity in their route. So, for example, if we're launching a ready-to-drink beverage line, it might do extremely well in urban populations and not so well in rural areas where people bring drinks from home. So finding the opportunity is the first part. So that really goes into knowing your customer. And then you have to find if it's the right fit for the market. So typically our distributors, they bring it on to about 50 stores initially. And if a product sells well in those initial stores, it allows us to see that it's a good fit for the market. We found the demographics that it resonates with, and we're able to bring it to similar markets throughout the country. But our role is to be that ear to the ground, to be that voice for those distributors, and to find them products that are going to sell in their markets that maybe they wouldn't have known about before.
So how does a deal get started for you? Because you're not the ones developing the products. Somebody else has developed the products and come to you to find the distributor?
Correct. So we have products submitted to us every day, which we review. We have a product review where we physically touch, taste, and see all the products. If we feel it's a good fit, we'll bring it to a couple of our distributors, get their opinion. And based on that, I get on the phone with the product owner and we find if it's the right path to market, if they feel it's the best time in their business trajectory to go through independent retail, and if our goals are aligned. And if so, we usually take a percentage of the profits as a commission.
So what are some of the ways that you determine, that market fit, or if it's a product you want to take on, or if it's a fit for your distributors?
A lot of it's gut feel. We've been doing this for a long time, so we have a pretty good experience on what product is ready for retail and what's not, if it's ready for national retail or not. Also, we want to make sure that it's not a Me Too product. So a lot of the products that we get are straight out of China, and there's 50 other brands with the exact same product in the line. So we try to eliminate a lot of those. We want unique products that our guys can build a business on. That's what we look for.
Got it. So once you've been presented with the product, you think that there's potential for the product. You're going to work with your distributor network to get it out there. How do you actually make it available to customers?
It's old school relationship based marketing. So a lot of these guys, they're in their trucks 8 to 10 hours a day. So we get on the phone with them. We explain the products. If they pick it up, they buy the products directly from our suppliers. The suppliers ship the products directly to them. They then take the product into the store. They sell it to the store. They then merchandise the product. They do the in-store stocking. They do the replenishment, and they go back and refill the unit. So they do the in-store DSD distribution, and we track the sales on the back end to make sure it's the right fit for the channel.
So what about creating customer awareness? And you're sold on the product, you've sold to distributors on the product. How do you sell the customers, or how can people generally make their product aware and available to their customer base?
Yeah, so that's really one of the hardest things is when the product is on the shelf, how do you get it to move off the shelf? A lot of the times it's really that guerrilla marketing and the entrepreneur behind the brand that makes it work. So the one thing that we've seen very successful is when an entrepreneur is directly involved in the boots on the ground business. So when the product is in the store, you need to have that in-store education as a component of getting the product to move off the shelf. They need to understand what the product is within 5 seconds of seeing it. You need to disrupt them when they walk in the store. So if you can picture yourself in a convenience store, there's a lot going on. To command that attention is very hard. So, whether that's with your merchandising, whether you put a dump bin right in the middle, and you interrupt their walking path, or you have a shelf talker that explains the product on the shelf. You need to use a couple different marketing tools to figure out what's going to work and what's going to be the best return on your investment to get the product to move off the shelf.
Before we get to what happens when your product moves off the shelf, let's talk about getting your product on the shelf, because I've watched Shark Tank, and the sharks are always impressed when the products are already in Walmart or Bed Bath or something. I've never tried to do it, but it seems like it's really hard to get shelf space.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the process or who you need to work with to actually get your product on the shelf.
So there's a couple different options when you're looking to get a product into retail. First is your goals. So if you're looking to get into retail, a lot of people, they look to the highest level first. So they look to a Walmart or a Target. But that's often a real problem, because if you develop a product based on a large retail order, that retail order could go away overnight, whether that buyer leaves or whether you get a chargeback. You could lose that business and then be stuck with a lot of inventory. And if it's food, expiring inventory. So that's something to be very aware of when launching a product into retail. We usually go on the side of building a very good shelf of inventory through independent retail. So if you have 500 independent locations and you're constantly turning through pallets, it's not as big of a deal when you get that larger retail order. If that doesn't work out, you'll be okay. So when developing a product into retail, you got to start with your goals. To go directly to a large big box store, you got to hire a broker. You got to develop that path to market. And if you're working grocery and you're going into regional grocery stores, you're going to have money for shelf space, promotions, and chargebacks, as well as EDI compliance and a lot of other factors that go into having your product on the shelf. However, going into independent retail, not nearly as expensive or challenging. Working with smaller independent sales reps, going into those stores and working directly with the owners, it's much more of a direct connection. And you get that feedback from those store owners on what's working, what's not working, and what you can adapt and change that will make your product move off the shelf a lot better. So we always like to start with independent and then grow to a larger retail setting.
Got it. Is there ever a case to go direct to large retail first?
Yeah, very much so with commoditized products. So with commoditized products like coffee or water, you need volume. You need to be selling container loads to make money. So with that, you need large orders. And that's really one of those cases where, if you're going hunting, are you going to hunt for rabbits where you can get, 50 rabbits, or are you going to go for a moose that'll feed you all summer? So if you're going for the big sale and you want to sell container loads, there's a risk on that because you might be stuck with a couple of containers that you can't sell or that get returned. So there's a case for both. But with commodities, it makes a lot more sense to go direct to large retailers.
And just for the sake of examples and illustrating the point here, what's some of the products that you would go direct to independent first for?
Pretty much everything in between. We're huge components of snacks and beverages. Snacks and beverages are our bread and butter. Also, anything that gets placed by the register. So that's really where we specialize, is impulse, novelty, snacks, and beverages. So anything like that, we're going through a lot of product in the store constantly, and we're going to need to replenish that every week. that's the world in which we live.
So you mentioned sort of the risk of having to deal with a large order or chargebacks. I'm going to bring up Shark Tank again because I feel like it's something relatable that a lot of people are familiar with. A lot of times people are raising money on that show in order to fulfill big orders, right?
Right.
So if your product is successful, capital seems to be something that you need to have to be prepared to deliver. What else goes into being able to successfully, deliver if your product takes off?
Yeah, if your product is really going well, you need to be prepared for that success. And a lot of that comes into your inventory management and your logistics of your products. You need to be working with a good co-packer if you're working with a product that you're not producing yourself. And if you are producing it yourself, you need to understand your manufacturing capacity and what kind of timeline it's going to take to scale that up. We've worked with several companies over the years where they've started to do very well, but for them to scale up their operations, it took them 6 months to a year, and they weren't able to keep up with demand, and they lost a lot of really good opportunities either to a competitor or to a different opportunity that took their slot. So being able to be prepared for that success, knowing if your co-packer can scale up to the needs, and knowing if your manufacturing can scale up to the needs is essential to know that timeline. Also, having multiple sources for raw goods. If you're relying on a lot of raw commodities, essentials, you need to know that if your supplier backs down, that you have 2 or 3 behind him that you have relationships with that are able to supply you with those raw goods. Also, having a backup plan if your closeouts. So a lot of the time when a supplier is working with a larger retailer and the larger retailer, especially in these days, goes out of business or returns product to you, you need to be prepared to close that product out, not take a loss on that, but be able to wash it and get it out the door before the expiration date hits. So having a closeout plan ready is essential in being prepared for that success.
So I've got a couple of questions here. Again, primarily driven by my relative ignorance of this industry. Let's start with, what do you mean by a co-packer?
A co-packer is a company that produces the product for your brand. So if I have a ready-to-drink iced coffee line, there's going to be a co-packer that I hire that I put my brand on the product that they produce. So they're going to be producing the product for me. They're going to be handling the logistics a lot of the time, as far as warehousing and shipping. And I'm going to be in charge of building my brands, getting the retail locations, building the distribution channel. But I'm not going to be on the hook for putting together, all the brewing equipment and the capping and the canning. So they would be handling the manufacturing. I will be handling the brand. That's what a co-packer does. They do the manufacturing for companies.
So it's sort of like white labeling.
Yeah, very much like white labeling.
Yeah. I'm curious. So, you use the example of food expiring, right? You said you need a backup plan for closeout ready. What's an example of a backup plan? Like, what could you do if your deal goes south and now you've got all this inventory?
Well, a lot of the times it's as easy as having, multiple outs. So if you have a relationship with Groupon, if you have a relationship on Amazon or eBay, to allow for you to sell a lot of your products very fast at a discounted price, that's a good exit plan. Also, there's a lot of closeout partners that would buy a product for pennies on the dollar, but it would allow you to pocket some cash instead of taking a loss. Because at the end of the day, the product has to go somewhere. And even if you're throwing it out, that's going to cost you money. So knowing where your product is going to go, if it doesn't succeed where it's planning on going, is an essential part of any kind of business plan with inventory management.
Right. It's sort of cutting your losses if you move it for cheap on Amazon.
And it's something that a lot of people don't think about.
Yeah. So you mentioned if your product is successful, one risk is that you could not scale fast enough. You mentioned that it could take 6 to 12 months to scale up, depending on the demand. Why is it so hard to scale?
So let's take an example where we're producing a widget. The widget comes in 5 components, and it takes my machine, we can build 500 widgets a day. But what if we get a large order and it's going to take me a month to fill the order? But that means that I'm going to be losing out on the opportunities that I'm currently selling. So for me to get another machine in place, get the molds built for that to build the widget, it's going to take 3 to 6 months, to get the machine shipped and manufactured, as well as to get those plates made, to troubleshoot, to get it installed, and to handle the logistics of the increased volume. So there's a lot that goes into scaling that a lot of people don't prepare for. And you really have to start scaling ahead of time when you're building that out. So understanding what your manufacturing capacity is, and if you hit or exceed a certain percentage, usually around 60%, you're going to want to start scaling by buying new machinery or buying excess inventory and raw goods, making sure that you have the ability to handle increased orders, because when something starts taking off, it takes off fast.
Yeah, and it seems initially a little bit like a chicken and the egg scenario, where you don't want to buy that extra equipment until you have the demand, but by the time you have the demand, it might be too late.
Very much so.
Right. So once you hit that 60% mark, it's sort of like this product is successful, and we're very likely going to need that extra capacity.
Right.
So you've got your product. It's in the stores. It's successful. You started with independent retail. If you're working with independent stores, and if you're maybe online selling, do you really need a distributor though? Like, why can't it just be direct to the stores, direct to consumer?
Direct to consumer is awesome, and it really works for a lot of things. I don't think in the future too many people are going to be going to Walmart to buy their toilet paper. We're going to have it delivered to our house, and it's going to be the same price. But for example, a pack of gum. If you're going to be going into a grocery store buying your fruit, there's going to be packs of gum by the checkout counter. There always will be. So having that gum by the checkout counter is a perfect example of a product that isn't going to make sense to have online. So having anything impulse or anything, by the checkout counter, as our company name, Mr. Checkout, alludes, those kind of impulse and novelty items are always going to be in style. Whether we have cashiers at the registers in the future or not, you're going to be going to and from the front door, and you're going to be walking through an impulse section, because that's where a lot of the margin is made in the stores, with those impulse products. The milk in the back and the eggs, that's not where a grocery store makes their money. They make their money on the impulse section and the immediate purchases that the back of your brain wants you to buy.
So let's say that you've got your shelf space, you're successful, you've prepared to scale up, but you're still in the independent retail space. When do you approach a big box retailer?
So approaching a big box retailer is really a big question, because you need to be at the point where you're able to stomach a lot of the fees that go along with that. So if you have a really good base of retail, and you understand that there's going to be product placement charges and advertising and chargebacks and margins for distributors and warehousing fees, that's going to be a place where you can start looking at big box retail. Because a lot of the time, when a product is just emerging and they go into a big box retailer, they don't understand the other costs associated with that, and they get put on the shelf. They don't move off the shelf immediately, and the products gets either canceled or closed out. A lot of the times, the products are put on the shelf, usually with a clause where you only get paid when the product moves off the shelf. That's a big burden for the suppliers because you're going to have to front that inventory. You're going to have to front the cost for logistics, and you're going to have to carry those costs because there's a lot of the times the terms are 60 to 90 days after the product gets sold. You might get paid for it, and that's minus any chargebacks and fees. So it's very expensive to get the product into the store on the shelf. And if it doesn't move off the shelf, it's going to be your responsibility to take it back. So it's a gamble. It's like going to Vegas, except there's contracts involved. So having somebody that understands that process and having a good, solid rep in your corner is always a good idea. We recommend going through a company like represearch.com to find an experienced sales rep. And if you're looking to get in touch with the buyers directly, if you feel that you can do it yourself and you have that experience, RangeMe is a great partner.
What was that? RangeMe?
Yep, rangeme.com and buyersdirect.co. Those are two really good resources.
You talked about a lot of contracts and working with retailers. Should you work with an experienced sales rep in this process?
What we found is that when you're taking that next step, when you've built a good base of a few hundred stores and you're looking to get into either a regional grocery store or a national player, you want to work with somebody that understands the market, whether that's the logistical aspect of it or working directly with the buyers and knowing what kind of fees are going to be involved and how to negotiate around a lot of that. Now, how to find that rep is often a challenge because they don't really advertise. So we found working through a website called represearch.com has been very successful. That's really a directory of a lot of independent sales reps. But a lot of the time, they don't advertise and you really can't find the exact company. So finding the right rep is key to building that relationship in those stores. A lot of the times when you do that step, you need to factor in the commission for those sales reps, which can be between 5 to 10% usually. With food products, it usually errs on the side of 3 to 5. But for novelties, sporting goods, anything that's in those specific categories, it's usually between 5 to 10. And having a lawyer look over your agreements with those reps is going to be key because you really need to protect yourself when working with reps as far as exclusivity and erring on the side of caution. This is your business. You want to have the freedom to work with as many other companies as possible. So making sure that you're not locked into a contract that may only offer you exclusivity into a retailer through that rep, and maybe they drop off the board. We've seen a lot of bad stories there. So having a lawyer look that over, don't get locked into exclusivity, and have that commission ready so that when you're going to take that next step, you're able to properly incentivize those reps.
So there's a lot of costs involved beyond the cost of producing the goods, right? There's the warehousing fees, the distributor fees, the sales rep fees, maybe a fee for the shelf space or whatnot. Is there a rule of thumb that, like, if it costs you $3 to make this, what you need to retail it for to kind of cover all these costs?
Not really. There's no one set example on that kind of a thing. But we did a really good job on our website by breaking down a lot of the margins and typical areas that costs are associated, because we get that question a lot. So it's under our resources on our website. And if you have any questions about that, I welcome you to go check it out there.
Okay, so to kind of wrap this up, for somebody who's looking to get into maybe the space, maybe the distributor product, what do you think is the number one pitfall, the number one thing that people miss when they're new to this industry?
The biggest thing, you want to be involved in the product's launch. You want to know step by step, and you want to be involved in each step throughout. The biggest pitfall that we've seen is that you see some success, you get the ball rolling, and then you're looking to go too big too fast. The best path to market in our experience is to build a really good base of independent retail using independent distributors and to grow with that increased inventory so you can get your costs down and you can stomach some of the pitfalls that might happen later that won't put your business out of business, but you'll be able to succeed and grow.
Awesome. Yeah, have patience, grow slowly, and you'll be successful. Joel, if people want to work with you or Mr. Checkout Distributors, where can they go to find out more?
Our main website is mrcheckout.net, or you can follow me on Forbes through my articles there.
Great, Joel. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I learned a lot. It's a really interesting discussion. Makes me a little scared to ever launch a product, but if I do, I'll give you a call.
Sounds good. Very good to speak with you.
Thank you so much. Well, that's all we have for today. As always, thank you for listening. Please be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode.
This has been Inside Forbes Councils. Please be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're a member of the Forbes Councils and would like to participate in our podcast series, please email your member concierge. If you're interested in joining a Forbes Council, learn more at ForbesCouncils.com.